Have you ever been scrolling online and seen a big debate brewing about why some blockbuster movie just completely bombed? Well, there's a really provocative argument out there that claims to have the answer, a so-called woke agenda. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what that argument is, piece by piece, based on the source material that's making this claim. Let's get right into it. Everything kicks off with this one very powerful claim. This is really the heart of the whole thing we're looking at today. This idea that all these box office failures, well, they're not just bad luck. The argument is that they are a direct result of audiences rejecting what the source calls political messaging. Okay, so that is a huge claim to make, right? You can't just throw that out there. You need some evidence, some logic. So how does the source actually build its case? What examples does it use? That's what we're here to do. Unpack it all step by step. So first things first, the argument has to define what the problem actually is, and it frames it very simply as Hollywood's woke problem. Here's the core premise in a nutshell. The argument is that when movies decide to prioritize what this source calls a woke agenda, things like really obvious political messages or what it calls forced diversity, over a story that pretty much anyone can connect with, they end up pushing away a massive chunk of the audience. And according to this argument, that alienation shows up clear as day in the ticket sales. Now, to try and prove this point, the source brings out its first case study. It's a look at recent films that it specifically labels as woke box office bombs. Let's see what evidence they're putting on the table. So the source basically points to a handful of recent really high-profile movies that were, let's be honest, financial disasters. It holds these up as Exhibit A, saying these are the films that were just weighed down by their own political messaging. And this is where the argument really starts to get interesting. The source lays out its data for the movies it says are failures. And you start to see a pattern here, right? For each of these films, we're calling them movie A, movie B, and movie C, you see two things. One, they didn't make money. And two, check out that last column. There's a huge gap between what the critics thought and what the audience thought. This chart really just drives that point home. For movie A, for example, the professional critics, they loved it, gave it really high scores. But the actual audience, their score was way, way lower. The source argues that this gap is the proof. Critics might have loved the message, but the public, the people actually buying the tickets, they rejected the movie. Okay, so after laying out the so-called bombs, the argument completely flips the script to try to make its case even stronger. And it does this with a case study of what it calls the apolitical hits. The logic here is pretty simple. Provide a direct contrast. These are the movies that, according to this source, put things like story, character, and just pure spectacle first. And because of that, they didn't just do okay. They became massive global blockbusters. And again, the data is laid out just so you can compare it side by side. For these successful movies, movie X, Y, and Z, they're all listed as huge financial hits. But here's the crucial part. Look at the scores. This time, audiences and critics are pretty much on the same page. They're both high. In this chart just shows that alignment perfectly. Remember that huge gap we saw before with movie A? Well, for movie X, the scores are practically in total harmony. The source uses this as its final piece of proof. When a film just focuses on universal entertainment, it wins over everybody, critics and audiences. So, after comparing the bombs and the hits, the source presents its big conclusion about what audiences are trying to say with their wallets. It calls this the audience's verdict. So what is that verdict? Well, according to this argument, audiences want four key things. First, they want stories that are, stories first and foremost. Second, they want themes that feel universal, that almost anyone can relate to. Third, they want pure entertainment, not to be lectured. And finally, representation that feels natural to the story, not what the source calls forced diversity, just to check a box. The source really boils all this down to a single word, balance. And it's quick to define what it means by that. It's not about avoiding serious topics, it's about focusing on compelling stories that bring a broad audience together, instead of making movies that seem to cater only to one specific political viewpoint. All of this analysis, all these examples, they build up to one final definitive conclusion. It's presented almost like a call to action for the whole film industry, and it's framed as the